Hi, I'm Mike Hudson, Director of the Museum of the American Printing House for the Blind. Welcome to the Redux presentation of sessions from the Hidden Legacies of Helen Keller Symposium, which was held in Louisville, Kentucky on September 17th and 18th, 2022. The symposium, with primary sponsorship from the American Printing House for the Blind and the Filson Historical Society, brought together scholars, writers, and Keller enthusiasts from across North America. In 2020, the American Foundation for the Blind Helen Keller Archive arrived at our museum on 23 pallets. And since then, our staff has been busy cataloging, describing, measuring, and inventorying this most amazing history of one of the most amazing women of the 19th and 20th centuries. I'm sitting in front of her desk from her house at Arcan Ridge. Helen Keller was a writer, activist, advocate, ambassador, and world traveler who profoundly affected the way the world thinks about people with disabilities. And yet, she is little understood, often frozen in time as a little girl with her hand under the water pump behind her parents' home in Tuscumbia, Alabama. Our symposium was just a beginning effort to bring together the most current scholarship in innovative ways to better understand Keller, her companion Anne Sullivan, and her times. We hope you enjoy the series. Each session will be dedicated to a single speaker from the symposium. Our third session on Saturday afternoon was titled Tracing Evidence, Picturing Keller, Reproductive Advocacy, and Eugenics in the Progressive Era. The panel used film clips from multiple genres of silent films produced in the Progressive Era to explore how the U.S. public imagination was persuaded, or not, about different issues and values in public health, eugenics, reproductive control, and policy. The second presenter in that session was Dr. Graham Warder, Associate Professor of History at Keene State College. Dr. Warder expanded upon the topics explored by the previous speaker, Janet Golden, on eugenics, immigration, birth control, and blindness prevention associated with sexually transmitted diseases, all topics Keller engaged in. Graham Warder earned his PhD in American social and cultural history from UMass Amherst. Since 1999, he has worked with the Disability History Museum, an online humanities resource providing primary resources and curriculum about disability history. He teaches in the Masters of History and Archives program and serves as chair of the History Department at Keene State. His research interests include disability history and 19th century America, including the American Civil War.
As you notice up there, actually this is a change last minute. I selfishly changed the title of my presentation to Eugenics Written with Lightning, and I'll explain the title in a minute. My presentation today will build on what Janet Golden just told us about public health, eugenics, and Helen Keller. Some of it will also connect with Helen Keller's 1919 film Deliverance, and especially its subplot, which has a eugenic message. I'm also going to present some clips from two other films, the 1917 pro-birth control movie, The Law of Population, that Janet just introduced to you, and then from an educational film made by the state of Connecticut in 1920, and that film is called The Making of an American. All these are silent films, which for some of us can be difficult to watch and seem a bit slow, but in the teens and 20s, these films were considered powerful and exciting. Let's remember what Woodrow Wilson said about that blatantly racist film about Reconstruction, 1915's Birth of a Nation. Wilson reportedly, regrettably, and disgustingly said about that film after it was shown in the White House that it was, quote, writing history with lightning. Well, here it is eugenics that is written with lightning. In the early 20th century, eugenics, which is so discredited today, was considered by people then as a real science. When eugenics was brought together with film, it made for a formidable alliance. From its beginning in the 1880s, the eugenics movement in the United States believed that it could only achieve its goal of race betterment if it could reach the American public. They certainly sought to educate the public, as you just saw, but they also wanted to proselytize, offering eugenics as a new pseudo-religion. That starts all the way back with Francis Galton, who coined the term eugenics and argued that it should become a new religion. With an evangelical fervor, eugenicists spread their message that a heavenly future through eugenics was possible and that a hellish future awaited those who did not heed their warnings. They also saw you also just saw that they did this in all sorts of venues, in state fairs, in public lectures, in posters and pamphlets, and perhaps most effectively in the films of the silent era. Their success rested on the cultural authority of science in a modern world, even if it was a science that masked traditional prejudices and biases with a facade of objective facts. The goal that eugenicists sought was the improvement of society by encouraging reproduction among those they considered fit and discouraging it among those they considered unfit. By the way, almost all eugenicists considered themselves among the fit. Their success can be measured by their legislative and legal victories of the 1920s, the restrictive immigration acts of 1921 and 1924, those anti-miscegenation laws throughout the South, and the practice of surgical sterilization for eugenic purposes, a practice declared constitutional by the Supreme Court's Buck v. Bell decision of 1927. Eugenicists largely defined fitness in terms of race and disability. According to them, both race and disability were fixed by biology and especially by new understandings of heredity. Rather than seeing race and disability as historically contingent and socially constructed, they presented race and disability as timeless scientific facts. And eugenicists invariably discussed these categories of race and disability in hierarchical terms. For them, there was a natural hierarchy of race. And disabilities were also arranged hierarchically. For example, whether you were labeled an idiot, a moron, an imbecile, was determined by the science of supposedly objective IQ tests. Biological fixity and hierarchical arrangement were thus hallmarks of the eugenics movement. Now, race and disability were certainly at the center of eugenics. But I want to also look at these films with a slightly different focus by adding a third way we clump people together, and that's social class. And also by adding a fourth category, gender, at least in terms of how gender was refracted through social class. In many ways, these categories work together during the eugenics period, so maybe it's best not to separate them. I like to think of these categories as mutually reinforcing hierarchies of difference. But my main argument in viewing these films, I'm just offering this as an interpretation, is that eugenics was an attempt to legitimize and institutionalize the culture of 19th century Victorian, of the 19th century Victorian middle class at the very moment when those values were under attack, especially by young people. So eugenics ultimately, the way I see these films is eugenics trying to make social class, just like race and disability, a biological category. So let's look at the films, and the first one is another clip from The Law of Population. Let me just add one little thing about The Law of Population. The very first scene in that film is a quote from Thomas Malthus. It's just a picture of a book from Thomas Malthus, just saying that population grows faster than the food supply, which is the basis of a lot of the assumptions about population. So can we see the next clip from the Law of Population?
A gardener in front of a greenhouse greets well-dressed visitors. The gardener, without a coat, pulls up seedlings from a tray while speaking with a man and woman in overcoats. The gardener speaks. Yes, sir. Every gardener knows that his seedlings need thinning if any are to grow into useful plants.
So this is a mainstay of eugenics films. Sometimes it might be farm animals that need to be weeded out. Sometimes it's a gardener literally weeding out what he's growing. Next clip, please.
Inside a rough apartment, an aproned woman holds a young child and greets well-dressed man and woman visitors. With her free hand, the woman picks up and carries a plate of sliced bread out to 5 young children who wait eagerly at a table. The well-dressed couple follow her, and then at the doorsteps, the young mother turns toward them and falls into their arms. The visitors are upset. Screen card, where God sends mouths, he ought to send meat. A doorstep dialogue between the couple and the mother continues. Screen card, I was an orphan and barely 17 when I was married.
So there's a little bit of protest against God there for the Malthusian law of population growing faster than food supply. Notice the class messages there. The doctor and the middle-class woman with the hat in flowers doing research in this working-class, apparently immigrant family. Next clip, please.
Seated on a rough bench outdoors, an older man faces the camera near a woman washing laundry in a tub, her back to the camera. A young couple, both in dress jackets, approach the older man. Screen card, that's it, my son. Marry early and raise a large family. The older man gestures to 4 children of various ages. They fleetingly observe the scene of their parents and sibling with less than happy look on their faces. The old woman is not happy as she looks on, shaking her head. The aproned woman is upset. Screen card, you seem to overlook the misery resulting from large families on small wages. Remember that mouths multiply more rapidly than wages.
The elder woman is Malthusian in perspective. So there's obvious messages there about the man is from an immigrant background, traditionally wanting his son to marry young and have many children. And the message of this film is what a disaster that would create. Next clip, please.
A different tenement yard. This one has a young woman scrubbing laundry with washboard in a tub as she shakes her head, her mouth tight. An older man in overalls with young man in rough work clothes stand on either side of a wood fence discussing a newspaper and pointing to the woman. Screen card. That's a fine woman of yours, just the kind to have a big family for a man. She's the wife for me, eh? The 2 men laugh, their heads nod in agreement. They shake hands. Then the young man offers the older one a drink from a flask he pulls from his jacket. The younger man smiles again at the woman and rubs his hands together. The older one walks away as the younger man blows a kiss at the woman.
Now, that clip, I love that clip because for a middle-class, native-born audience, the alcohol signals that that's going to be a dysgenic marriage. Remember, this is on the eve of Prohibition being enacted, and in some ways, Prohibition is the ultimate cultural victory of that Victorian middle class. But they're certainly signaling that these are lower types that should not reproduce in large numbers. And I think that swig of alcohol sends a clear message to the audience about that. Next clip, please.
Outdoors in a small courtyard, a jacketed young man confronts a wedding party, including a minister. An older man roughly pulls the young bride and groom toward the clergyman holding a small book, screen card. Yet Christianity fails utterly to prevent these squalid broods of dirty, sickly, depraved, ignorant, starved children of poverty being disguised and tortured by the world in which they have been ushered by a power over which they had no control, until in their despair they curse the God who gave them such a life. The protesting young man pushes away the groom and takes the bride away through the door and beyond the house. The groom follows them and catches up. He pulls the man away from the bride. The men fight, throwing punches, and roll around on the ground. The protesting young man knocks the groom down with a punch, and he runs off with the bride. Screen card: with the aid of Tony's former chum, Mary, the bride, finds work, and a sweetheart, the hero who saved her from marrying the man at the beginning of the scene.
Violence in the name of eugenics. All to prevent, the list of adjectives there: squalid, dirty, ignorant, and this marriage, this stopping of this wedding and this marriage through violence will prevent the reproduction of those lower, supposedly lower types of working class immigrants. Next clip, is there another? Is that the last one for law of population?
Yes.
Thank you, good. Okay, so we can certainly talk more. I hope we'll have time to talk more about these films during a discussion period. But let me begin by introducing the next film, which has at least some music along with it. It's called The Making of an American, and it is less blatantly about eugenics. I'd argue that it promotes a soft version of eugenics. The film made by the Education Department of the state of Connecticut does not promote immigration restriction, but rather explains how an immigrant can become an American by making the essential step of learning spoken English, something that affected both immigrants and deaf people. But before we look into that film, I'd like to add a personal story as an aside, something I very rarely do. I'm a white, non-disabled male, but I have a story from this summer that I hope is relevant because it is one about immigration and disability. I was born in Montreal, but I grew up in Connecticut, where this film was made. And this past summer, I finally got around to becoming a US citizen. This formally happened at a ceremony last month in Worcester, Massachusetts, for 492 individuals from 81 countries. It was an impressive ceremony. But before I was sworn in, back in June, I was interviewed and took the test about US history and government with an employee of the US Citizenship and Immigration Services. Fortunately, I passed, thereby justifying my PhD in American history. And overall, it was a pleasant experience. I really had it was an enjoyable experience. But during the interview, I was asked a question, something that was required of the interview process. Have you ever been declared legally incompetent or been confined to a mental institution? The implication was that if I had answered yes, I could be denied citizenship. This was a legacy of the eugenics era. But then when we finished the test and we were done with the test and I was told I had passed, I was handed a piece of paper that would document my successful completion of the interview and test. But on that paper, the wrong box was checked. What was checked read, USCIS granted your request for a disability exception. The requirement to demonstrate English language ability and/or knowledge of US history and government is waived. So, disability could disqualify someone from citizenship, but at the same time, disability could mean required accommodations for that same person. Such is the tangled history of disability and immigration in the United States, and I left just shaking my head. Okay, back to this film. All right, this film is from 1920. Its production values are a little better. It's a little more, it feels a little more modern. So let's just watch the first clip from The Making of an American.
The state of Connecticut, Department of Americanization presents The Making of an American, an appeal to all foreigners to learn English. This statement is repeated in Italian and Hungarian.
Okay. Notice they give you different languages there.
Screen card. Attracted by the hope of greater things than Italy can afford him, Pete has taken the great step and landed in America. Close-up of a man with a mustache, Pete, wearing a brimmed hat and neckerchief, his face pensive as he looks about. Screen card. Do you know how to work an elevator? At interior of an office, two men there, and Pete with his hat in his hand. He shakes his head no and answers. Screen card. Can't he talk English? Pete's friend replies and repeats the question to his friend. Pete shakes his head. They politely leave the office together, hats in their hands. Screen card. There are always jobs enough in America, but not the kind Pete expected. Three men dig near the foundation of a large brick building, while a foreman stands nearby watching. Pete walks into the scene, shaking his head. He shrugs his shoulders. The foreman shouts instructions. Pete's face brightens. Screen card, Italiano. He greets the foreman and the two talk. Pete takes off his jacket to join the crew. A black man standing by the wagon laughs. Pete shovels dirt into a nearby wagon with the laborers. It is clearly hard work. Screen card. The dream of a beautiful home has vanished. The day's toil ends in a sordid tenement amid noise and dirt.
Okay, I'm just going to describe the rest of the film. The next part of it, he gets hurt in an accident where he's unable to read a sign of danger. And so because he doesn't have English, he gets hurt badly and could have gone from being impoverished in a tenement to being a pauper in an almshouse. But this is a story of success. And what he does in good self-help fashion, he attends night school to learn English and becomes a citizen and improves his economic prospects. And in a little piece of over-determined plot, he goes on to work as a safety inspector for the state of Connecticut. So this is a story of uplift, of an immigrant rising from this position, but by learning English. Now, in some ways, this film offers a sort of way out of eugenics, right? Because he's able to transcend his immigrant beginnings, that the individual can find success through education, even if you're an Italian. But I don't think this is a complete way out of eugenics, because this man has acquired English, and in the view of eugenicists, he can then pass that acquired characteristic on to his children. But that's my take on this. I'm open to other interpretations. Thank you.